first. Second, the reforms of the Palestinian Authority in institution building were supported by donor aid. And donor aid went largely to support the institution building of the PA, as opposed to the expansion of public employment or other subsidies that would actually have indicated to the private sector that the fiscal situation would continue to be out of control. So there was really a sense that you have a government that is gradually restoring fiscal sustainability. That has an important confidence effect on the private sector, and that was translated not so much in increased private investment, but in a better utilization of existing resources. So given the available pool of labor force and given the capital stock, you had a much higher output than had prevailed prior to 2007, prior to the advent of the Prime Minister's Fayyad's government. So if you look at what has happened in terms of growth, construction went up in important areas of the West Bank, especially in the areas in which restrictions were relaxed. You have the growth in Gaza still around 0.1% in 2009. So Gaza itself did not benefit from the restrictions. Nevertheless, the blockade was eased. But despite this easing, you still have some very unusual constraints. Even when the PA pays the salaries or credits the accounts of employees in Gaza, still those workers don't necessarily have the cash to actually draw their salaries. So this is, you still have anomalies and you still have constraints that make it difficult for people to cover their basic needs, even in a situation where public finances are in order. But nevertheless, you can say that in the West Bank, you have a restoration of confidence and a big positive impulse from the relaxation of movement and access in major cities in the West Bank. So we have really a gradual movement towards normalcy in the West Bank, a situation that's still very difficult in Gaza, but overall an improvement in living standards. Still, it's important to emphasize that in terms of levels, the level of real GDP per capita is still well below that which prevailed in 2000. So the growth, if you just talk about the growth story without putting it in context of an economy in which output is well below potential output, in which you have a severe underutilization of resources, then it's very easy to actually confuse this growth with a good health of the economy. The economy is still well below potential in terms of output, and the basic needs of a large part of the population are still not covered. Now, in terms of the prospects, there was a lot of, there were several articles which actually make it appear as if this relaxation of restrictions on internal movement and access is sufficient for the growth that was witnessed last year, about 7%, to continue over the longer term. And if you look at if you read our own studies, the message is very clear that two things need to happen for that growth to be sustained. First, and that's based on the experience of almost all developing countries which have a small domestic market. All economies that have a small domestic market depend on the expansion of the export sector for a sustainable growth in real GDP per capita. So no economy, according to the data that we have at least, no economy was able to grow in a sustainable way without its own export sector expanding. And so simply by relaxing the restrictions on internal movement, you could have, in the short run, an increase in growth just because the existing resources are better utilized. People are able to make better use of labor and capital to produce more output without necessarily actually reducing unemployment or reducing the investment rate, but just because people are able to trade from one city to another, for example, are able to have a normal life whereby inputs can actually enter the cities and be used as in production processes that were highly repressed to start with. So the one important condition is the removal of the barriers on exports. First, the barriers on the exports of goods and services to Israel have to be removed. This is the first condition. For an economy that does not have a seaport and airport, there's no other alternative in the for this year, I think. If you want to see a sustainable rate of growth that really is in the order of 7%, there is no alternative from having those barriers removed. Second, as much as possible, the access to markets outside of Israel have to be encouraged. That is, we have to find a way in which, in addition to access to Israel, exporters could trade with the rest of the world. And this is an important element of the current 2-year plan by Prime Minister Fayyad, where he's actually aiming at having a seaport, functioning airport. Perhaps not realistically, this could not realistically be done this year, but at least as an objective to be presented and to emphasize the importance of having an export market other than Israel. Second is, and this is something that I think is not well understood by most people, 60% of the land of the West Bank cannot be used economically without the permission of the Israeli authorities. That's the area C. So 60% of the land is out of bounds for the private sector. I think if we want to see sustainable growth, then it's important for that constraint to be removed. And